Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity in times of Corona. I worked on this with my colleague from Manouba University. And as you said, so the presentation is on stereotyping and stereotypes in news pieces on family violence. So, of course, news reports is one of the many tools that we have. Very bad sound. So news reports today represent are shared on the different media, and these are one of the tools used to shed light on events that take place and important topics that take place around the world and in Iraq, especially that we see that violence has increased, especially domestic violence. And these topics on violence now actually have this international and humanitarian perspective, and it's more and more covered by media. So there are so many images that so media is sharing. So, and including stereotypes. So media and its different types of course, have different functions, most important of which is presenting reality or recreating or representing reality in its different levels, economic, political, social, and so on and so forth. Of course, media is sometimes required to or has to represent an image that does not express reality. And these stereotypes become a part of the work of the media. So now let's talk about how do we create stereotypes, or how do we have stereotypes? Stereotypes are the result of a number of of course, the ideas of a group of people who actually assign certain qualities or characteristics, good or bad, to a certain group of people. And so we play a part in actually creating stereotypes. And whether by creating or reinforcing these images, especially through visual, of course, tools and media. And you can mention here that journalists can unconsciously add their own perspectives, their own opinions to the news stories they share with the public. They can also use generalizations and judgments on certain topics without looking for the background of the topic and the details of the topic. And so, in order to find out what stereotypes are shared in news reports, the researchers defined the problematic of this research, which is what are the stereotypes presented by news reports on domestic violence. So the aim of this research is to identify how stereotypes are used in news reports, especially with regard to actors in reports about violence. And since, as I said, violence is this social this phenomenon that affects the social tissue and the family. So the importance of this research lies in the fact that it might unveil stereotypes instilled and shared by news reports on violence. And this research is a part of media research, and both researchers actually used, of course, this methodology and to look out, to look up or to study this phenomena. So, as we said, we took the samples of this research from news reports on violence And we took a sample of 5 different reports. Each news report tried to tackle one type of violence. So as I said, we used the survey method of research, and we, of course, took 5 samples on violence. As to the research tool, let me first talk about the units that were used in the process of analysis. So both researchers actually relied on 2 tools during the analysis, or 2 units, let me say. The first unit is the word as an essential, of course, unit in, and that plays an important role in extracting the categories of analysis. And here we talk about the word violence. So word violence we could find in different kinds of domestic, physical, moral, verbal, and so on and so forth. And also, we discussed the characters that we have seen in news reports, whether they are murderers or aggressors, and so on and so forth. There were also categorizations of different actors or different characters that are mentioned in these news stories. Also, we talked about the reasons of violence, or what pushed these actors to commit violence. And amongst these reasons, we talked about the word drugs, family issues and problems, or the problems within the same family between the husband and the wife, or cheating, or getting a second wife, and so on and so forth. As to now the topic unit, the researchers actually identified the frameworks for, of course, dealing with news reports on violence. And we were able to identify 3 frameworks that were clear in the news reports that were studied. Amongst these reports, we have of course, the interests. And here the media focused on the passion and using of course, on compassion and using adjectives that would target the feelings. So there was this effective and emotional representation. And so there was this anger, there was a call for responsibility, compassion, so on. The second framework is a framework of responsibility, or assigning responsibility. And this framework, media styled to actually to find someone who's responsible for this, or to blame someone, of course, for this act of violence. And this framework came with the subcategories, including, for instance, bad friends, bad companions, and of course the use of social media without any supervision, the lack of of interest on the part of the family, drugs, and the lack of ethics. This is one of the recurrent subcategories, and sickness and the inability to, of course, assume the burdens and the responsibilities of the family. Also, we have a third framework that was presented in these news reports. We'll talk about the ethical frameworks. So in this framework, here we know that media should take into consideration human rights, and in this category we have also subcategories, including the fact that violence as an act that destroys social fabric, and the fact that domestic violence is a bad phenomenon that needs to be treated, and of course aggressions that took place actually are usually caused by some bad reasons. We can't hear the speaker. Back. Okay. Through the analysis conducted by the researchers, we were able to reach a number of findings. And I'd like you to focus on the finding, the most important findings. So reports, or news reports, when they're talking about violence, use usually the expressions murderer, whether for male or female, and they talked about motives, whether for revenge or so on and so forth. However, we found also news reports that another descriptions other than other than murderer, and we're talking about here people who are committing violence due to, of course, violence that they have undergone themselves. And here, what we know, what it is deduced is that these news reports actually reflected the stereotype, saying that people became violent because they themselves were subject to violence or to stress that created this violent reaction. Also, reports show that some of the actors had some psychological issues and diseases, including schizophrenia, and of course, that was used as an explanation for, of course, such acts. And here, it shows that the stereotype shows that people who commit violence are described as mentally sick people. And the media presented this as an explanation for their acts of violence. Also, as to the use of drugs and family issues, we have seen that
السببين هما مسببان رئيسيين لعملية التعنيف.
News reports showed the drugs and family issues and main reasons for violence within the family. They discussed the fact that the use of drugs lead to mood swings, active and violent actions, and create problems within the family. And they say that it could actually say that people who commit violence could and who use drugs could lose their job, and could, of course, this could create for him problems at the family, at the job. Now, at the level of framework and the analysis of news reports on violence, we have seen that the ethical framework in dealing with acts of violence was paramount and was the first framework used in discussing and analyzing acts of violence. So the ethical framework is 58% compared to the other two frameworks. And this is due to a number of factors, including the relationship between the person and their local community or family or society in general. And here we see, of course, that news reports presented a stereotypical image about the person and their family. Very stereotypical image that we see a lot about on TV, in movies, in cinema, and so on and so forth. Also, news reports showed, especially that discussed human interests and trying to blame or to put the blame on certain entity, on person. It shows that actors of violence or people who commit violence are linked to a number of reasons that might look stereotypical. And here we can clarify that, of course, one of the some of the main reasons presented in these reports, including lack of education, children who were abused, of course, social and issues and a lack of understanding society, alcoholism, also macho behavior, and social criteria that allow for male dominance. Now, there are some news reports that defended people who committed domestic violence and explained these acts by a number of reasons, including and most of which the one that was mostly used is that the people who commit domestic violence were themselves subject or victim of domestic violence, and issues between husband and wife, and problems of communication. And here it shows that there is, of course, the stereotypical image of males as the people who are responsible for the household, for the family. Also, reports have shown that media relies on of course, creating stereotypes of people who commit violence without studying the phenomena from its different perspectives, without hearing the different parts of the story. They just used these ready-made pictures, characteristics, and adjectives to describe these people. And to conclude, I'd like just to note that in order to avoid stereotyping, we needed to establish criteria to avoid, of course, creating these stereotypes. Why in the work of media and in writing news pieces, and we have these ready-made images that we usually rely upon in using by using some adjectives, some and that would create of course, a stereotype. It's true that generalization and stereotyping is not the same thing, but generalization could lead to stereotyping, and this is why creators of news reports should be careful as to what they present on media. And here we have to note that the responsibility is shared between media institutions and media academies in order to actually to be able to overcome this phenomenon of stereotyping. Thank you for your attention, and I'm sorry for going for too long.
Actually, my presentation will be in English, so thank you very much for everyone, and good morning from IPSI. Good morning for everyone. I'm very happy to be under the supervisor, Dr. Siham Najjar, and I will share my screen with you. So, So my presentation will be focused on stereotypes of poor social groups in the Tunisian media discourse during the outbreak of Corona, facts, practices, and ethics. But let's see some photos that have been spread from different media in Tunisia during 2020 and 2021. For example, this is a photo from Mater Bizert. It was a director of hospital who was crying because of the bad situation of at that time in the outbreak of Corona. Of course, many other photos were spread by different media in Tunisia, especially the websites and of course the television, like these photos from Kirwan, these photos from Jandouba, Beja, and of course, the situation in Kurdwan at that time was very critical. So because of that, I was wondering to have a research about the image or the stereotypes of poor social groups in the outbreak of corona via the media. So let's speak a little bit about the research. So why this research is very important at that time. So the corona pandemic has revealed many aspects of the Tunisian government's failure to perform its duties toward the poor social groups, whether in the popular neighborhoods, for example, like Tadam, Sijumi, Kabaria, in the capital Tunis, or in the interior region like Beja, Jandouba, Kiran, and so on. So this research seeks to reveal the predominant stereotypes in the Tunisian media discourse about poor social groups and marginalized region in Tunisia and its relationship with media ethics. So, which is the research question? The research question is based on a descriptive and analytical approach, and we seek to answer the following problematic. How did the Tunisian media discourse perpetuate the prevailing stereotypes about marginalized social groups during the corona pandemic? So this research is based in two hypotheses. The first is we suppose that Tunisian media has played a positive role in spreading negative stereotypes about the poor social groups during the pandemic. And this needs to have some statistics and public perceptions, especially from viewers, from receivers. And the second is about how media has deepened the marginalization of poor social groups by its coverage during some dangerous events in order to support injustice by disequilibrium in its discourse during the outbreak of corona. And this hypothesis, of course, needs to have an analysis about facts, about practices and ethics revealed from the discourse of media in Tunisia. So the methodology is very simple through a quantitative and a qualitative analysis. The study aims to extract the stereotyped images prevailing in the Tunisian media discourse about poor social groups during the outbreak of corona. And we will adapt a survey to understand a little bit the representation and the perceptions of public when they just watch, for example, television or some coverage about poor social groups. And the second is a discourse analysis, and of course it's content analysis because we have some statistics, and a qualitative examination. So some keywords appeared here: news or media, then stereotype as a social concept, and of course poor social groups as a sample, and ethics. So we will in her research try to reveal the relationship between these four keywords. And beside the survey, which is addressed to 150 persons, we will, of course, have an analysis discourse about different media in Tunisia, especially Shams FM, Nisma, Tesa TV, Radio, National Radio, Mosaic FM, Business News, Haqaq Online as two websites. And we will focus on two facts occurred in January 2021 and in June 2021 in relationship with the outbreak of corona. And we will here try to understand the meaning of different results occurred during this research. And we will, of course, understand a little bit the relationship between stereotypes and observation, because it's very important here to know that stereotypes are not arbitrary or are not simple like that, but it's grounded in the observation of everyday life. And when we speak about everyday life, we speak about media coverages too. So the first part, or the part number one of this research, is about how media creates stereotypes about poor social groups during the outbreak of corona, perceptions and main stereotypes. So we asked the public, which is about 150 persons or participants in our research survey, do you think that media contributes to create stereotypes about poor social groups in Tunisia, especially in 2020 and 2021? And they said that or 73.3% of answers were answering that media has contributed in stereotypes creation about poor social groups in Tunisia. The arguments are that media spreads typical mental image about women and young people, and it describes them as miserable and marginalized social categories all the time. It's repeated all the time in our media. So when we speak about repetition, we speak also about stereotype. And of course, the second argument is that media doesn't make any efforts to choose another angles. For example, the success story, something very good in our area, especially in the internal region in Tunisia. But all the time they focused on the bad or negative stories or news stories, especially in photo selection and of course video editing. That when we speak about reportage, portrait, reports, etc. So media shows the lack of awareness, the ignorance and the backwardness among the marginalized social groups all the time, and is looking for buzz, which is a culture nowadays in our media. And of course, they're looking for excited stories, especially the social one. So this is why many interviewers describe this like practices, media practices like inhuman or anti-deontology of media here when we see something like that in our television and in our media. So this led us to see that media has fallen in different unprofessional traps or gaps, and it has chosen many offensive words, especially the words, the concepts are an indicator to ensure stereotypes about the poor social groups, especially in the outbreak of Corona. So some reasons behind this. First of all, the interviewees have condemned journalists of spreading populist representation about this category, especially in the capital Tunis and in the different regions in the country, especially in the northwest region or areas. And they have condemned journalists because of their limited culture, because they didn't have or they didn't make any efforts to have another vision or another version of coverage about this category. So we noticed, of course, several stereotypes repeated with different terms, and we can here categorize this in different terms: cultural, economic, political, social, and others. For example, we can see that the repeated words in these answers, for example, in the case of cultural terms, we find here uncivilized, uncultured, ignorant. Economic terms, for example, illegal immigrants, because they explain that many illegal immigrants, they came from this marginalized area in Tunisia. And of course, unemployed because of the crisis, the economic crisis, and beggars. And in the political side, we can see the word terrorist, because of course, the phenomenon of terrorism is in relationship with this kind of region, and criminal, and stateless without any importance or without any value for the state or for the government. And the social terms are, for example, violent, miserable, and disadvantaged. And others, like, for example, dirty, irresponsible, mafious, because they accord this to person who, for example, try to rob, for example, some places or have bad intentions. Well, let's see a psychological impact of stereotypes spread by media about poor social groups in Tunisia. 80% of interviewees who have expressed that some stereotypes spread by media have led them to criticize the journalists' practices and to stop watching this kind of media coverages about marginalized social groups. And of course, some stereotypes forced them to criticize and condemn government and to invite politicians to react in order to help marginalized social groups to develop their economic and social situation, especially in social media. We see all the time some invitations, some condemnations, some accuses from the Tunisians of this social media, and they invite a politician to react. And of course, some interviewers have described the lack of consideration toward the poorer area as a sort of inhumanity, because there are no justice between, for example, the region in the coast and the region in the internal places in Tunisia. So the impact of the outbreak of the pandemic in media stories about poor social groups, we can find here the impact of this crisis or health crisis in Tunisia and its impact in media. For example, you can here find that 73.3% of participants have agreed that the corona pandemic has reinforced the media's promotion of stereotyped images of marginalized groups in Tunisia, like we see at the first of this presentation. And 66.7% think media has neglected to raise basic issue about the Tunisian poor groups, especially when we speak about social and economic files or issue. And the main answers about these questions is very important to add that media content presents information without providing solutions, so we can just discuss the problem without any solution in the horizons. And of course, media contributed to distorting the image of the disadvantaged group and did not contribute to support citizens for ideological reasons because of the political problems and issue in the country. So this is why this category of people stay as they are. So this is why they said this. And of course, the corona crisis emphasized the fragility of the situation of poorer groups in Tunisia and exposed especially the shortcomings of the media. So the lack of professionalism in media, and the solution presented by the media are always superficial. So this is why we speak about the deep impact of corona on this category of social class. So did this discourse has deepened also the oppression during the outbreak of the corona by media? Yes, because we find here that 53.3% of participants think that media is responsible for the oppression of the poorer social groups in Tunisia, especially when we speak about the confrontation between protesters and CAPs, for example, or some facts that are dangerous, like, for example, Tavamun City or Sijumi, and we will see this after that. So how is that? Many interviewers have qualified the hostility of some media because some media spread the discourse of hostility, discours de haine. Donc, this poorer social groups as cultural persecution, and the poorer social groups are exploited by the media to broadcast scandals and excitement in social program. Let's move to the part number 2. Yeah. Number 2 of this research. So media discourse about poor social groups during the outbreak of corona, uses and ethics. Here we can see how the media discourse has deepened the stereotypes, and we will speak here about 2 aspects. The first is media language, so terms, concepts, lexicons, etc. And the second is how media uses photos in some coverage. So this is very important. So two main facts. The first is about the events of Hayat Tadamun occurred in January 2021. We were there in quarantine, and protesters came from different zones of Tadamun city or Tadamun neighborhood to express their anger against the policemen and against the government. And we can see also the other fact, which is the Sidi Hassin al-Sijumi. It's a violent confrontation between protesters and cops or policemen. And it's occurred, of course, in 2021 in June, just after a few months. So between the two facts, we have just few months. So here we can find different terms revealed from texts in the websites, especially via Tunisian media. We can find here, for example, the actors are poor social groups and cops or policemen. We can find terms used to describe this actors, especially the poor social groups, violent young people, protesters, rioters, offenders, criminals, thieves, vandals, suspicious dead, victims of poverty, victims of assault, marginalized people, etc. The evaluation of these terms in the whole sample of our research is negative. And we can find in the other side the terms described to the policemen. We can see here: ready to fend off, defenders of public and private property, right fighters, right victims, security, and so on. And the evaluation of this kind of text or discourse of the media is positive sometimes and negative sometimes. We can find here some subjectivity in to describe poor social groups, and objectivity by the way, about the cops or the policemen. So because of that, many interviews said that media has also report the version or the official version of the news or of the story. And about the several coverage and different lexicon, we can find different lexicon about the poor social groups, like the crime lexicons, rioters, the criminals, violent thieves, vandals, etc. The pity lexicons, because here we can play a little bit in the psychological situation of the receiver: victims, poor, marginalized, miserable, etc. We can find three lexicons about the other actors, which are which are the cops, like the defense lexicons, like fighters, defenders, etc. The victim lexicons, riot victims, victims of assaults with a stone, etc. And of course, the third is the aggression lexicons, the aggressor, accused of child assaults, etc. So the evaluation has shown that the poor social groups are badly treated by Tunisian media, as no objectivity has been detected during the events. Let's speak a little bit about some photos from different media. Like this photo was used by a IPSI TV website. It describes confrontation between protesters and policemen in Tadamun neighborhood. And the stereotypes here is violent, rioters, and offenders. And we can see here, for example, a photo used by Nisma TV website showed the post office was targeted by young men in Tadamun neighborhood, stereotypes, vandals, and thieves. Then another photo used by IPSI TV, and it was about a group of young men attacking the security forces by stones after tear gas. And we can see here stereotypes, violent young people, and protester. Another photo used by IPSI TV, and here we can find dirty, marginalized people, residents of popular neighborhoods, miserable, because it showed here that protester just threw rubbish in the street. And another photos about Haqaq Online. And here we can see the stereotypes of vandals and thieves by a few photos used by Champs FM. And another, the famous photo that circulated a lot in our media, is about a teenager has been violently assaulted and stripped of his clothes in the road by security men in Sidi Hassin al-Sijumi, and the stereotype, of course, you can hear marginalized, poor, and also a victim of assaults, victim of a government. So this is why we can also, in the end of this presentation, we can also have a conclusion about the ethics in our media and say that many ethical deviations have been appeared in the level of journalistic work. This deviation appears especially through the use of some offensive words and negative terms towards poorer social groups. And of course, some distortion appeared in the performance of the media during the outbreak of the epidemic through some influential photos like we just seen, and some harmful scene that would promoted several negative stereotypes about poorer social groups. So thank you very much for your attention.